This is the first of 3 videos looking at combining arguments. This first video is going to focus very much on the fine details of the argument structures. We'll present these in both diagrams and some text explanations. I want you to think about how these diagrams can be used to facilitate your own note-taking, how that process can be a preparation towards good quality critical writing or note-taking in critical reading, how you can break down the arguments presented by others to ensure that you've got a good understanding of the logic that's being presented to reach the conclusions which you are reading, and then help you critically evaluate how much confidence you have in those arguments. The simplest form of an argument is a single argument structure. Here we have an example, A leading to B. It's worth thinking, well, how could that be linked? Could this be deduction, induction, or abduction? Is B a hypothesis, another premise, or a conclusion? And then how can we consider the type of language that would be used? So A therefore B, or B because A. We've got a bit of a clue in the arrow. So we normally follow the alphabet, and so here we could say A therefore B, and that's a very deductive style structure. If we were looking at a more inductive, we might say A therefore B is the most probable conclusion. Alternatively, we might have an observation for A. Based on the observation of A, the most plausible explanation is B, which of course would be more of an abductive type argument. If you're not clear on deduction, induction, abduction, I encourage you to watch the other videos that are presented on the channel. As we start to look at more complex arguments, we might consider convergent arguments, where multiple independent premises come to the same conclusion. Each premise is separate, standalone, but it does reach the same conclusion, therefore providing more evidence and increased degree of support for the conclusion. As an example, we might have A as regular exercise improves cardiovascular health, B could be regular exercise helps maintain a healthy weight, and the conclusion C is therefore regular exercise is beneficial for the overall health. Now we could take away either the first or second premise and still reach the same conclusion, but we might not have that same level of support, and therefore whoever we're communicating this argument to may be less convinced than the converged argument. Similar to convergent structures, we have multiple. In a multiple argument, more than one premises lead to an intermediate conclusion, and that often progresses on and becomes a premise for a final conclusion. So you'll see multiple arguments as substructures of a complex argument, and it helps move from one step to the next. So as an example, we might have a balanced diet provides essential nutrients, and essential nutrients are necessary for maintaining good health. And we have an intermediate conclusion that a balanced diet is necessary for maintaining good health. That's not a massive progression from either of the original premises, which is why this is generally an intermediate conclusion. You may be thinking, well, if we're combining this information, how do we know whether we've got enough or whether this is too much? The first thing we need to think about is what type of research are you doing? Are you competing some form of a literature review, which tertiary research? In which case it's important to include all the evidence that's encapsulated by your search strategy. Everything within your inclusion and exclusion criteria should be included. However, if you're writing a primary or a secondary research project, you need to balance how much evidence is needed to provide a fair insight to the topic. That's especially important if you're aiming to publish in a journal article that publishes articles that have fairly short introductions. So you can't afford to have multiple argument structures with 10 points leading to an intermediate conclusion, which is really not that different. You're not getting that same benefit of the degree of support that's being presented. So what we're really looking at here is the strength of the argument, which is sometimes referred to as transfer of acceptability. You may also see terms like justificatory force or an argument's weight. And so if we try and tease apart the difference between convergent and multiple arguments, then the key difference is that convergent structures provide a range of alternative lines of support. You might also see that as lines of defense for the proposition. But in contrast, multiple structures provide only a single line of support or defense as is leading towards an intermediate conclusion, and they're less distinct than that which we've seen in the actual convergent arguments. Two other similar looking structures are the linked and coordinative argument structures. And these are very similar to convergent and multiple, but the key difference is that the evidence has a stronger relationship. So for example, in a linked example, we might have regular exercise improves cardiovascular health, aerobic exercise maintains a healthy weight, Therefore, regular aerobic exercise is beneficial for overall health. This looks fairly similar to the argument that we saw previously in the convergent argument example. However, notice that here we have the addition of aerobic exercise. And so we're back to looking at that cardiovascular exercise. These premises are much more similar and much more linked in the convergent argument that we saw before. Likewise, if we look across at the coordinative example, then eating fruits and vegetables provides essential vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals cannot be acquired from meats and grains or in fruits and vegetables. The immune system requires vitamins and minerals to function effectively. Therefore, a diet including fruit and vegetables is healthier than one without. These are really very, very similar points, and you can see how it could be easy to provide lots of repetitive examples and lose that actual word count without bringing much extra strength in there. So we have to be very careful with coordinative arguments to make sure that we get the appropriate strength without moving towards excessive amounts of points and references that make the work harder to read. We can also look at how we can combine different types of argument structures to make a more complex argument. So we might start with a multiple and have that intermediate conclusion, but then bring in an independent premise matching that conclusion to reach an overall conclusion. So here you can see we have A1 and A2 as our multiple argument structure leading to that intermediate conclusion, which also serves as premise A. A second premise B giving a convergent argument structure leading to the ultimate conclusion C. Likewise, we could have a coordinative to single. So here we have A1 and A2 strongly linked, providing intermediate conclusion A, leading to ultimate conclusion B. These are very useful ways of looking at how a discussion section is progressing. In our own writing, we can look at these to see how the text is actually guiding the reader towards the conclusions we want them to learn. In the writing of others, we can trace their arguments to see how they reached certain conclusions. So the take-home messages I'd like you to get from this first part are considering the benefits of using these diagrams to understand arguments. It's often easier to look at a simple diagram than to look at a page of text. To remember that quality writing has structure. Plan your writing with or without diagrams. Think about the arguments that you're actually presenting and use that structure to make sure that others can understand your work. Likewise, when you're reading the work of others, look at the structure that they're presenting to understand the arguments that's being presented. Finally, I'd like you to reflect on how evidence is linked to understand the strength of an argument that's being presented. We'll build on this kind of global thinking in the second video.